Welcome back, true crime fans. In today's story, we're diving deep into the shocking case of Alan Helmick, a businessman whose life was tragically cut short under mysterious circumstances. It's a story full of unexpected twists, emotional depth, and dark secrets. Let's unravel this chilling case together. On June 10th, 2018, in Whitewater, Colorado, Alan Helmick's life was abruptly taken. His wife, Miriam Helmick, was the first to discover his body. The scene was grisly. Alan's lifeless form was found face up in the kitchen, a pool of blood surrounding his head. The initial appearance suggested a robbery gone wrong, as the house seemed ransacked. But the discovery of a bullet casing near Alan's body raised the first suspicions. Had it been a burglary or something much darker? Miriam immediately called 911, her voice a mixture of panic and what appeared to be calmness. The 911 call was disturbing. Miriam said she found Alan's body and described the blood under his head. But as the operator continued to ask questions, Miriam's responses seemed too rehearsed. She quickly provided a series of receipts, voice notes, and cell phone records that seemingly confirmed her story. She even mentioned calling Alan multiple times, but getting only his voicemail. However, this perfect alibi raised suspicions among investigators. How could Miriam have such clear documentation about where she had been on the day of the murder? It was as though she had prepared herself for any questions. Was she simply a grieving widow, or was there something more sinister at play? As investigators continued to comb through the scene, they noted the oddities of the crime scene. The house had been deliberately made to look like a burglary. Drawers open, trash cans overturned, yet nothing of significant value appeared to be missing. Could Miriam have staged the scene? The more investigators looked at the situation, the more it seemed that the crime wasn't just a random act of violence. It was calculated. But it wasn't just a scene that was raising questions. Miriam soon revealed a startling piece of evidence, a note. Miriam claimed she found a card at the scene which read, "Alan's first. You're next. Run, run, run." The chilling message suggested that the killer had already planned a second victim, Miriam herself. Was this a real threat, or was it a ploy by Miriam to make herself seem like an innocent bystander? The investigators were left with a growing sense of confusion. Was Miriam the target, or was she the one pulling the strings in this twisted game? They had their doubts, but Miriam remained the primary person of interest. Could the answers lie within her story? Or was she too good at hiding the truth? Before Alan's murder, there had been another strange incident, a failed car bombing. Just 6 weeks earlier, Alan and Miriam were in Delta, Colorado, completing a business transaction. They were selling a business and had just collected a check for over $100,000. However, things took a terrifying turn when they noticed smoke coming from the back of their car. Upon further inspection, Alan discovered that someone had attempted to set their car on fire by placing a makeshift incendiary device in the gas tank. But the car didn't explode. It simply started smoking. Miriam's reaction to the event was odd. Rather than panic or be terrified, she seemed too calm, almost as though she knew the fire would fail. When she spoke to authorities, she seemed oddly detached, as if this was just another inconvenience she had to deal with. Was this another failed attempt on Alan's life? And if so, who would want him dead? The authorities were quick to consider the possibility that this was a distraction, a failed assassination attempt, followed by the murder just weeks later. But why wasn't Miriam more concerned about the fire? This strange car fire incident wasn't just a coincidence. It seemed planned, part of a larger pattern that pointed toward Miriam's potential involvement in her husband's death. The investigators were now left with a startling realization. Someone wanted Alan dead, and they weren't going to stop until they succeeded. To make matters more complex, Miriam found a card after Alan's death that seemed to confirm the threat. Alan's first. You're next. The note not only seemed to confirm the planned murder, but also hinted that Miriam herself might be next. However, the more the investigators looked into Miriam's past, the more unsettling truths began to emerge. Could she be the one pulling the strings all along? As the investigation continued, Miriam's past began to surface, revealing a trail of dark secrets that pointed towards her involvement in Alan's death. The initial suspicion fell on her, but the case seemed to grow more complicated with each passing day. Miriam had a history that could not be ignored. When detectives dug deeper into Miriam's life, they discovered a striking similarity between Alan's murder and the mysterious death of her first husband, Jack. Jack had died years earlier under mysterious circumstances, ruled a suicide by the authorities. Yet, questions about his death were never fully answered. Miriam had been married to him for several years before his death, and now it seemed that her relationship with Jack mirrored her relationship with Alan. Jack's death had always seemed a bit suspicious. He was left-handed, but the official cause of death, a gunshot wound to the head, was inconsistent with his natural hand-deadness. He allegedly used his right hand to pull the trigger, a detail that raised eyebrows. More troubling was the involvement of Miriam's half-brother, who was the first officer to arrive at the scene of Jack's death. The potential conflict of interest and the strange circumstances surrounding Jack's death began to form a disturbing picture. Had Miriam been involved in her first husband's death too? The investigators started to wonder, was Alan's death not an isolated incident but part of a recurring pattern? Miriam's behavior, her calm demeanor after the crime, and her eerie lack of remorse began to seem less like that of a grieving wife and more like that of someone who had gotten away with murder once before and was ready to do it again. Financial motive was an undeniable factor in this case. Alan's business dealings had made him wealthy, and he had amassed a considerable amount of money during their marriage. Miriam, however, seemed to be obsessed with controlling her husband's wealth and finances. Investigators discovered that she had written checks for $40,000 from Alan's personal account shortly before his death, raising questions about her financial motives. Was she looking to take everything for herself? Yet it wasn't just money. Miriam had also isolated Alan from his children. Her behavior had grown increasingly controlling, especially in the weeks leading up to Alan's murder. Alan's children had noted how Miriam kept them from contacting their father, and when they did manage to speak with him, he was always sick, strangely ill, claiming he could not stand up or even answer his phone. But was he truly sick, or was this another part of Miriam's manipulation to isolate him? The more the investigation uncovered, the more it seemed that Miriam wasn't simply a jealous wife. She had motives that extended far beyond just emotional revenge. Alan's life and his finances had become increasingly controlled by Miriam. The fact that she was isolated him from his children and that she had taken large sums of money from his account only intensified suspicion. The investigation also revisited the failed car bombing 6 weeks before Alan's death. The authorities had originally thought it was just an accident, but now, with Miriam's behavior under suspicion, they couldn't rule it out. The attempted car fire had been carefully staged, and Miriam had shown an unusual lack of concern about the incident, almost as if she knew the fire wouldn't succeed. Why wasn't she more upset? At this point, it seemed as though Miriam had been setting up Alan's death for months. The failed car bomb wasn't an isolated incident. It was an attempt to kill Alan, and it was only the first try. When that didn't work, Miriam shifted tactics. She had gone to great lengths to create the perfect alibi. She had voice notes, receipts, and cell phone records that made her seem like an innocent, concerned wife. But could these documents simply be part of a well-rehearsed plan to cover her tracks? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the investigation, revealing even more about Miriam's deceptive behavior and the shocking twist that led to her eventual arrest. What secrets is Miriam hiding? And how did the investigators finally uncover the truth? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chilling true crime mysteries. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the murder weapon was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Alan had been shot with a .25 caliber bullet, and investigators knew that finding the gun would be the key to solidifying Miriam's involvement in the crime. The only problem? The gun was missing. There were no signs of it anywhere in the house, and no one knew where it could be. But the absence of the weapon wasn't the only thing raising suspicions. Alan's children had some unsettling details about the gun that they had never shared before. One of Alan's children recalled seeing a .25 caliber pistol in his father's sock drawer. The gun had been there for years, and it seemed to be an old family heirloom of sorts. But when the investigators searched the house, the gun was gone, and no one knew where it had been hidden. Was it possible that Miriam had taken it with her when she staged the crime scene? Could she have used Alan's own weapon to kill him? With the missing gun and mounting evidence of Miriam's deceitful behavior, investigators intensified their search. They were determined to uncover where the gun was hidden and to see if it could be tied directly to Alan's death. In a shocking twist, the investigators uncovered an old family story from 1989 that would change everything. One of Alan's children recalled a strange incident involving her grandfather, who had shot at her grandmother in a fit of rage. The neighbor had intervened before the situation escalated further, but the police report indicated that a bullet had been fired into the yard. This seemed like an unimportant event at the time, but now it became a crucial lead in the investigation. The authorities decided to investigate the location where the bullet had been fired. They used metal detectors and searched the area, hoping to find a connection to the murder weapon. Against all odds, they found the bullet buried in the ground near the site of the shooting. The discovery was astounding. The bullet was carefully collected and sent to the ballistics lab for testing. Would this bullet be the key to unraveling Miriam's role in Alan's murder? Months passed, and finally, the test results came back. The bullet from a yard had been fired from the same .25 caliber gun that killed Alan. It was not a perfect match, but it had enough similarities in the grooves and land impressions to suggest that it could have been fired by the same weapon. This was the breakthrough the investigators had been waiting for. Miriam's involvement was becoming clearer with every piece of evidence they uncovered. As the investigation continued to uncover more about Miriam's behavior, the authorities focused on her financial motives. They discovered that Miriam had been forging checks from Alan's account in the weeks leading up to his death, withdrawing over $40,000. This wasn't the first time Miriam had used Alan's money for her own gain, and the authorities now had enough evidence to show that Miriam had been motivated by greed. But the case didn't end there. Miriam's actions after Alan's death raised even more questions. It seemed like she didn't even wait for the body to grow cold before she started looking for another rich man to replace Alan. Just months after Alan's murder, Miriam was already dating someone new. Her lack of grief, her sudden interest in money, and her behavior after Alan's death made it seem like she had no remorse for what she had done. It was clear that Miriam had been calculating from the very start. She had manipulated Alan, isolated him from his family, and even orchestrated his murder for financial gain. But now, with the forged checks, the murder weapon tied to her, and the mounting evidence against her, the case was beginning to take shape. In another shocking twist, investigators began to suspect that Miriam had been inspired by a movie, No Country for Old Men, a film that came out just a year before Alan's death. Featured a villain who used a car bomb to distract his enemies. When authorities investigated Miriam's rented movies, they found that she had watched No Country for Old Men just days before the attempted car bombing. Was this the inspiration behind the failed car bombing? Was it possible that Miriam had gotten the idea to kill Alan from the movie? It seemed bizarre, but investigators couldn't ignore the possibility. The more they dug into Miriam's actions, the more they realized that she was willing to try anything to kill her husband. If the car bomb didn't work, she would shoot him, using Alan's own gun to carry out the cold-blooded murder. Before we proceed, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support and engagement help us bring more crime stories like this. By the time the case reached court, the evidence against Miriam was overwhelming. Investigators had uncovered Miriam's financial motives, her strange behavior before and after Alan's death, and even the chilling connections to a movie plot. However, as we all know, courtroom drama can sometimes be unpredictable, and it was clear that Miriam was determined to defend herself at any cost. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting their case against Miriam. They painted a chilling picture of a woman manipulating her husband, isolating him from his family, and staging his murder for financial gain. The failed car bomb 6 weeks before Alan's death was presented as the first attempt to kill him, and the forged checks from Alan's account reinforced the idea that Miriam was motivated by greed. The prosecution also focused on Miriam's lack of remorse and the evidence of her deception. They argued that Miriam had acted out a role, pretending to be a grieving wife while all along orchestrating her husband's murder. They pointed to her 911 call, where her responses seemed rehearsed, and her carefully crafted alibi, which seemed a bit too perfect. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Miriam's own actions. In an unbelievable twist, the prosecution presented the note Miriam had claimed to find after Alan's death. Alan's first. You're next. Run, run, run. They argued that the note was a red herring, planted by Miriam herself to divert suspicion away from her and to make herself appear as the next target. But the ironic part was that Miriam was the one pulling the strings all along. As the evidence mounted, it became clear that the case against Miriam was solid, but the defense wasn't going to make it easy. Miriam's attorneys were determined to cast doubt on the prosecution's claims, arguing that there was no concrete proof linking her directly to the crime. They tried to suggest that the failed car bomb was just a coincidence, and that Miriam's actions could be explained by her grief. They also tried to downplay the significance of the forged checks, claiming that Alan had been fully aware of his financial dealings. But the defense was fighting an uphill battle. Miriam's behavior seemed far too suspicious to ignore, and the timeline of events pointed to her guilt more and more as the trial progressed. In a move that shocked many, Miriam Helmick decided to take the stand. For 2 days, she defended herself, trying to convince the jury of her innocence. She claimed that she was simply a grieving widow who had been wrongly accused, but her testimony was not as convincing as she had hoped. Miriam's demeanor on the stand was oddly defensive, and she seemed to struggle with answering the more difficult questions. When asked about her role in Alan's murder, she tried to explain that she didn't know who would want to harm Alan, but her answers were full of contradictions, and many in the courtroom were left questioning whether she was telling the truth or she was simply trying to cover up her tracks. The prosecution had one final opportunity to cross-examine her, and they made sure to use it to their advantage. They zeroed in on the car that Miriam had found after Alan's death. Miriam had admitted to sending the car to herself in an attempt to create a false narrative of a phantom killer. This admission was a game changer. It showed that Miriam was not a helpless victim, but a woman manipulating the situation to her advantage. The prosecution's final blow came when they revealed that Miriam's online search history revealed a pattern of looking up ways to kill Alan. Searches for drug overdoses and painkillers that matched Alan's sudden illness in the weeks leading up to his death. This, along with the missing murder weapon, the failed car bomb, and the forged checks, painted a clear picture of a woman who had coldly plotted her husband's murder for money. After 16 days of testimony, the jury began deliberations. The weight of the evidence was heavy, and after just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Miriam Helmick was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder for the car bomb, and forgery. It was a swift decision, but the impact of the verdict was felt deeply by Alan's family. While nothing could bring Alan back, they had finally found justice for him. Miriam's cold, calculated actions were laid bare for the world to see. The once beloved wife was now a convicted murderer, her years of deception and manipulation exposed for all to see. Miriam Helmick was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite her claims of innocence, she was unable to escape the truth. Alan's family, his children, his friends, and his colleagues finally had the closure they so desperately needed. The case that had seemed so uncertain in the beginning had ended with justice, but it was a bittersweet victory. Miriam's actions left a trail of broken relationships, not just with Alan, but with her own family. Alan's children had lost both a father and the illusion that they had ever known the woman who had claimed to be their stepmother. Her lies had torn apart a family, and though she had taken Alan's life, she hadn't escaped the consequences of her actions. The murder of Alan Helmick is a tragic story of manipulation, greed, and deception. Miriam's cold and calculated actions led to a life sentence in prison, but the emotional scars left on Alan's family will last much longer. In a world where money and power can sometimes cloud a person's morality, this case serves as a stark reminder how even those closest to us can hide dark secrets beneath a facade of normalcy. Thank you for following this case with us. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime stories. Stay safe out there, and always keep an eye on those closest to you. You never know what secrets they might be hiding.